Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Work time. Welcome to the side event on towards the protection and empowerment of families, the impact of mega trends. The panel by the Doha National Family Institute in partnership with the permanent mission of the State of Qatar to the United Nations and the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. So the first word is to thank all the partners for being on board to address this topic as a side event to the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Special thanks as well for our speaker. We will start by a speech from Her Excellency Ambassador Alia Ahmed Saif Al Thani, permanent representative of the State of Qatar to the United Nations, as a recorder video. And for the interpretation, I think you can, there is like a translation, so please need the translation and press the button. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to co-host today's event with the Doha International Family Institute and UNDESA in preparation for the 30th anniversary of the International Year of the Family. This event is extremely important for us because we view the family as the basic unit of society. We continuously work to strengthen the family through legislations and sector-wide family-oriented policies and programs. The fact that we have a Ministry of Social Development and the Family in the State of Qatar, whose main task is to deal with the family issues, show how important we think the family is for the country's development. The Doha International Family Institute is also at the forefront of research, advocacy, and solutions to help families deal with the problems they face in a world driven by megatrends. The 4 megatrends under discussion today are demographic changes, migration, urbanizations, climate change, and technological advancements. They all pose challenges to families, but they also present opportunities. For instance, digital technologies may promote a healthier work-life balance. Qatar, for example, has passed a number of laws regarding flexible work arrangements, in part due to the possibility of remote work. Regarding urbanization and its impact on families, I'm extremely proud to note that Qatar is home to several sustainable cities which have planned to take into account the needs of families. In conclusion, let me state that the State of Qatar is committed to celebrating the 30th anniversary of the International Year of the Family, highlighting the opportunities it offers to stress the critical role of families in sustainable development.
Thank you, Sheikh Alia, for the welcoming remarks. Then we have another welcoming remarks from Ms. Daniela Bas, Director of the Division for Inclusive Social Development, UNDESA. So the floor is yours, Daniela.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Your Excellency Al Tahini, Permanent Representative of the State of Qatar, Dr. Al Emadi, Executive Director of the Doha International Family Institute, ladies and gentlemen, and allow me also to thank really deeply one of my colleagues, Renata Kasmaska, who is actually the staff member in the division that is the focal point on family for all of us. She's an amazing colleague. So it is a real honor and a privilege to deliver these opening remarks at today's event, also on behalf of the Assistant Secretary General of DESA, Ms. Francesca Spatolizano. Now, we are discussing today the protection and empowerment of families in relation to the impact of megatrends, as the ambassador has just mentioned. And this side event actually, I believe, is to contribute to the ongoing preparation for the 30th anniversary of the International Year of the Family that will take place in a couple of years so in 2024. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the ambassador of the state of Qatar for her continuing support for the work of DESA in general and the division I lead in particular on many social issues, especially those relating to the family and sport. And secondly, we are also grateful for the support of the Doha International Family Institute, which has been instrumental in its research and advocacy work on family policy developments. Now, as part of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, the Division for Inclusive Social Development follows on the priorities of DESA with a special emphasis on social groups as well as the family. And several megatrends shape our world and define progress towards sustainable development. For instance, the UN DESA report entitled Shaping the Trends of Our Time by the United Nations Economist Network for the UN's, it was, I think, the 75th anniversary. It was issued in 2020. Well, it identified the following most important megatrends, and I will repeat them. The first one, climate change, then demographic shift, particularly when it comes to population aging, urbanization, the emergence of digital technologies, and inequalities. Because out of the 5 trends, 4 have been explicitly taken on board as part of the preparation of the International Year of the Family, the 30th anniversary, with the addition of migration in conjunction with urbanization, because they're really closely linked. And with regards to inequalities, the topics have been taken on board implicitly. So when we analyze the selected megatrends, we look at their impacts in terms of creating or exacerbating inequalities. In fact, work on inequalities is an integral part of the work of the division I lead, as it is stated in the 2020 World Social Report entitled Inequality in a Rapid Changing World. Powerful economic, social, and environmental forces are affecting inequality. The implications of these global forces, or megatrends as we call them, are broad and varied. And some can help equalize opportunities, while others are exerting mounting pressure on income inequality, for instance. So this report examines the impact of technological innovation, climate change, urbanization, and international migration on inequality. And it notes that whether these trends are harnessed to encourage a more equitable and sustainable world, or allowed to exacerbate disparities and divisions, will largely determine the shape of our common future. And as trends have a widespread impact on the achievement of sustainable development goals, shaping policy, taking into account their impact on families, is essential if we are to achieve the objectives of the 2030 Agenda. And let me give you an illustration. I'm almost done, but I think it's important also to give an example. When city planners and local governments use a family perspective, they tend to plan cities better, with more green park spaces where all generations can interact. In Curitiba, in Brazil, the success of urban planning is associated with the conscious planning process that expanded the amount of green spaces for residents. 1.5 million trees were planned, and a complex network of pedestrian walkways were incorporated into the city design. Life expectancy, for instance, in Curitiba is now 2 years longer for residents than in the rest of Brazil, and infant mortality remains somehow low. Another example of family consideration in urban planning is Singapore, where the government offers initiatives such as low-interest housing loans for young families who decided to live in close proximity to their aging parents. And this positively affects intergenerational solidarity and care. and other arrangements that, are very important, particularly when we think of extended families. So I would like to thank the organizers for providing the forum for awareness raising and advocacy on the need for family perspective in megatrend analysis. And I'm convinced that investment in family policies managing the megatrends are really bound to empower families and will result in progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. I took a teeny bit of time. I thank you very much, but I really wanted to share with you how much we believe in the importance of families and your work in Doha. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniela, for this remark. Now we will start the panel discussion with a critical question to be addressed by Ms. Renata, focal point on the family UNDESA. The question is why this particular 4 mega trends that even Daniel spoke about have been selected for the upcoming 10 years. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Sharifa, and thank you so much for organizing this event, which is so important for our preparations for the 30th anniversary of the International Year of the Family. Yes, so actually the director already answered partially the question that you asked, Dr. Sharifa. So this is really part of UNDESA work, the trends that we are covering. So basically these trends are, why are they so important? They are omnipresent, they are well underway, they are interdependent, and they impact not only people, but the planet. So the trends are impacting families in multiple ways. So we are also focusing our attention on these trends because we really see that these trends have a way of impacting families in both positive and negative trends, negative ways. And it's really important to have family policies focusing on responses to these trends in order to face the challenges we are currently facing. So let me go one by one about the trends. So in our preparations for the anniversary, we actually started with new technologies, and we discussed this trend in 2021. And coincidentally, it was really relevant to discuss it then, as we have been living through COVID-19 pandemic. So as the pandemic was really a pivotal moment for societies, and it became crystal clear that the world would grind to a standstill if not for digital technologies that allowed us to work from home, to communicate with extended families, to shop online, etc., etc. So to analyze digital technologies from a family perspective was especially important as the impact of this trend was very fast and had different consequences for different generations within the family, with children and youth dramatically impacted and parents often feeling helpless in dealing with fast technology advances in their children's life. So from our research, we could see that parenting education, especially vis-a-vis new technologies, has become more important than ever, and parents needed guidance as to how to tackle their children ever increasing use of technology at home and also at school. So another impact was that we observed was that new technologies became extremely important for work-family balance, and as research demonstrated, they have been encroaching on work-family life balance due to the constant availability for telework, thanks to the new devices. So moving on, why mega trends of migration and urbanization, which are actually closely related? So perhaps it's not a well-known fact, or maybe not talked enough, is that family migration is a very important component of the overall migration, and yet policymaking has largely not responded to this trend. So family migration, which can be divided into several categories, such as family formation, accompanying family, family reunification, and international adoption, with some regional variation, is the major driver of contemporary migration. Again, we have scarce data, but the data that is available for OECD countries indicates that in 2018, for example, 41% of all permanent migration was family migration. So another important aspect for development is family remittances. So the family remittances really exceeded the FDI and ODA inflows. So they, but still there's more recognition needed as they continue to be really important for, especially for lower income countries with large number of family members working abroad. So linked to migration is of course urbanization, which no doubt has a positive trend, expanding families' access to employment and education. But if not done in a sustainable way, it can lead to urban sprawl, inadequate living conditions, and homelessness. That is why sustainable urbanization with family lens is indispensable if we are to have livable cities. So an important aspect of urban planning is the design of public spaces, as the director mentioned, especially green spaces where generations can interact. And here, it's really important to have a conscious urban planning in consultation with families and civil society as well. Moving on to demographic change, there is no doubt that this trend affects families a lot, especially in terms of falling fertility rates and longer lifespans. And the rapidly changing world has to invest in social protection and care for older persons, keeping in mind that traditionally it is the families who offer social protection and care. So empowering them to be able to continue this support is really a must. So as for our last megatrend, that of climate change, it is related to all megatrends mentioned above, and successful management of this trend is the most important if we are to adapt to changing climate patterns and embrace more efficient patterns of consumption and energy use, and here families can help. So it is clear that the environment cannot be viewed as an externality, but really the health of biosphere is a precondition for social development and sustainability. So climate change is really linked to all other megatrends. So with technological changes, as they have a potential to harness new sources of energy, energy storage, carbon trapping, etc. In terms of migration, as more and more migration is forced due to natural disasters, this is an area that really needs more attention. In terms of urbanization, as cities are more and more impacted by environmental hazards and more construction is being done in environmentally precarious areas, this should really be taken into account by urban planners. So climate change can affect cities' institutional capacities and exacerbate resource exploitation and environmental degradation through human activities, pollution, and overuse of water. So as for demographic change, there's no doubt that growing population impacts climate change as we live in the era of Anthropocene. So in fact, climate change will exacerbate the vulnerability of countries with relatively high population growth, population density, and fertility rates and reliance on rain-fed agriculture. So the analysis of climate change brings together all remaining megatrends. And I would like to emphasize that analysis of the megatrends from a family perspective is a missing link that is really worth exploring, as families must be protected from some of the negative impacts of the trends, and more family-friendly policies helping families to access new technologies, adequate housing, social protection, support for care provision within the family, and helping families in times of natural and man-made disasters is critical. So, but even more importantly is designing policies that empower families and, for instance, help them be part of circular economy where recycling and reusing take place. So let me just mention one aspect of the UN efforts within the megatrends that could be mentioned, that we are in the midst of the decade for family farming, and this is really the recognition of the role of families in food production. So this is especially important for rural families to be nutritionally sustainable, and that can also limit the rural to urban migration, contribute to overall sustainability. So all in all, as I tried to demonstrate, focusing on megatrends from a family perspective and investing in policies empowering families to deal with the effects of megatrends contributes to sustainable development and requires more attention from governments and other stakeholders. I would like to thank DFI for offering UNDESA great support in analyzing the megatrends at international and regional levels. We are bound to continue our cooperation in preparation for the 30th anniversary of the International Year of the Family and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniela. It's really good explanation for these mega trends, because we have been asked what you mean by this mega trend and why these only four mega trends, and this is very good explanation, and that's why we have all these experts in like this kind of perspective, and I will. One of the mega trends very important also, which is migration. And we are pleased to have with us Dr. Iman Araqat, Chief of Mission, International Organization of Migration, based in Qatar. And my question to this effect, you have experience working on migration at the regional level. So from your perspective, what are the effects of migration on families? Iman, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sharifa, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak at this important virtual event focusing on the family as a unit and the importance of protecting and empowering families as a whole. I would like to also thank the organizers for focusing on a very important question, which is often forgotten in the context of international migration, namely the impact of migration on the family. If we set up a truly understand the impact of migration on families, and here I would like to propose to use the term the impact of migrant families or families of migrants in particular, we should first and foremost direct our attention towards migration policies. Unfortunately, in today's world, we are increasingly faced with hostile environments that break instead of protect the family unit, that put limits on family reunification, where wealth and economic status affect the enjoyment of rights. The manifestation of this larger ecosystem is that a considerable number of people move on their own, often for extended periods of time without their family members. This continues to affect the poorest disproportionately. Moving alone without the family has occurred so much in certain migration corridors that we now have a special term for children in such circumstances. We call them children left behind. We have also recently witnessed an increased feminization of migration, with more and more women migrating for work, especially in the care sector and in sectors such as domestic work. In those low-paid sectors, women are usually deprived of the opportunity to migrate with their children or family members. When women in such occupations have children in countries of destination, they are penalized for it and often detained and deported. As a result, alternative care arrangements are emerging in countries of origin, where generations are entirely taken care of and raised by grandparents and sometimes by friends and neighbors back home. While remittances sent from the parent abroad are a lifeline to the families in countries of origin and the only hope for children for an education and a better future, generations have documented the impact of such separation on the family unit and family dynamics. Those impacts are often irreversible. For those who are fortunate enough to move with their families, integration in the host society remains a major challenge. As dependents, many migrant spouses are legally deprived from the opportunity to work in countries of destination. Many find themselves in societies that reject them for their color, religion, and ethnic origin. Many face problems adjusting to new languages, cultures, customs, and societies. Keeping people on the margins of society is a true loss for the family unit, the society, and the state. A paradigm shift is needed to start perceiving families as so much more than dependents, but as equally crucial agents of development, to making sure that we are empowering every member of that family to fulfill her own potential. Only then are we able to truly maximize the benefits of migration. Ladies and gentlemen, family rights are basic human rights for everyone, including migrants, documented or undocumented. The 1990 UN Convention on Migrant Workers and members of their families recognized the importance of protecting the family unit. Article 44 of the Convention, in particular, recognizes that the family is the natural and fundamental group unit of society. Of society and is entitled to protection by society and the state, and that the state shall take appropriate measures to ensure the protection of the unity of families of migrant workers. Protecting the family in the context of international migration means expanding existing migration pathways to include migrants and members of their families. GCM, which is the Global Compact for Migration, Objective 5 in particular, stressed the importance of enhancing the availability and flexibility of pathways for regular migration. And in particular,
مستوى الطاقة وفي مسألة التأمين، وقدمنا رؤيتنا من أجل نمو اقتصادي.
I'm sorry, I hear the interpreter voice. Can you hear me?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. And in particular, Para 21I stressed the importance of facilitating access to procedures for family reunification for migrants at all skills levels through appropriate measures that promote the realization of the right to family life and the best interests of the child. Protecting the family also means adapting our systems to adequately protect children in the context of international migration, whether they are left behind, in transit, or in countries of destination, and ensuring a continuum of care. Protecting the family means investing heavily through funding and programs in interventions that foster social inclusion and integration for migrants, particularly for spouses, to ensure that the family unit is well integrated. Protecting the family means full participation and economic rights to all family members. It means access to services and access to justice. It effectively means consciously and proactively bridging the gap between migrant and non-migrant families and ensuring equity. I thank you all for listening, and I hope our discussion today takes a step further in building solidarity among the different movements and sectors. Only then are we truly able to protect each and every family. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this fruitful information related to immigration and family. Thank you, Iman. And in fact, we are moving to a topic which is very important, but at the same time, under-researched, family and environment. We just conclude a regional meeting in Cairo in preparation for COP27, where DFI brought this topic to the region. Colleague, Dr. Gonzalo Castro, Executive Director of EarthNA, a new initiative in Qatar Foundation tackling environment and sustainability, will be walking us through a presentation in this topic. Gonzalo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sharifa, and thank you for the invitation to this very interesting event. I will try to focus primarily on climate change and family. And as you said, it's a topic that has not been well researched yet because the connections are not that obvious. Climate change is going to impact all aspects of our life. I have prepared 3 slides that I would like to share to illustrate some of these issues. Let me share my screen. And the first thing that needs to be said is that the effects of climate change are already being felt on the planet. This is the temperature change in the last 50 years. And as we can see, there is already an average increase in temperature of about half degree Celsius on the planet as a whole. But what is important about this slide is that it shows that this increase is not uniform. So we have much greater increases in the poles, and this is bad because this means that the ice in the North Pole starts to melt and we have sea level rise. And we also see that the arid regions of the world are the ones that are becoming warmer the quickest. So the take-home message of this one is that the increase in temperature is not uniform. There are some areas that are gonna become much hotter, much faster than others. Therefore, talking about averages is not sufficient. Let me show you another, I don't know why it's not moving, there it is. Now, this slide is the future. What it shows in blue is where are our emissions today, which is roughly here where we are. And then the different path, depending on how, what kind of measures we're gonna take as human society. And then on the right, you see how much increase in temperature is expected with the probability. The scientists agree that in order to avoid catastrophic climate change, we have to keep the increase in temperature at not more than 1.5 degrees. That is also the Paris Agreement. And in order to do that, we're gonna have to go through this route. We're gonna have to really start to go down very significantly in the emissions. And only then will we have some good probability that we're gonna keep the temperature increase at 1.5 degrees, which is the gray, as we can see here. Now, the current Paris Agreement promises or pledges will give us this line, and that basically is putting us already above the high probability that we're gonna be above 2 degrees. And the business as usual is really terrible. Business as usual without doing much, business as usual with a little bit of effort is gonna show temperature increases of more than 4 degrees. Very high probability. So obviously, this is not a scenario that we need to consider. So if we are to do all of our efforts to keep it at 1.5, we're going to have to reduce emissions very rapidly. And even then, we still have a 1.5 degree increase, which is 3 times what we have had today. Now, the issue is not just the temperature. The temperature, because we can adapt to temperature increases. The problem is the extreme events that come with an increase in temperature, whether it's fires, whether it's droughts, whether it's storms, etc. So it is also an increase in the extreme events. And this will cause a series of direct impacts on human life. Let's start here. Right now, we have an estimated 121 million undernourished people. Climate change is gonna reverse all of the gains that we have had of food security. As I said, drought, floods, and storms leading to displacement. So this is linking to migration, as we saw, and displacement. Then devastating wildfires, especially in Europe and North America, much more common. We're already seeing this. Then ocean coral bleaching, loss of oxygen and blue carbon, so very serious impacts on the oceans. Intense tropical cyclone activity with associated economic impacts. So as societies are richer, obviously the impact of storms are much higher, and then extreme heat had deadly impact. So it's really a combination of impacts that come out of the increase in temperature. And what the UNFCCC has said is climate change has a greater impact on those sections of the population in all countries that are most reliant on natural resources for their livelihoods and or who have the least capacity to respond to natural hazards, such as droughts, landslides, floods, and hurricanes. What this means is that the impacts on societies are not uniform. Rich countries can adapt. if we see an increase in sea level rise, then rich countries can simply build barriers, but poor countries cannot do that. So then you have an issue of equity. The poorest countries are the ones that have the least capacity to adapt. And within those countries, those people that depend for their livelihoods on natural resources, the people that they get their resources from the forest or from grazing or whatever, are gonna have the most, are gonna suffer the most. Now, trying now to bring this to what it means for the family. The first thing to see is that gender inequality has a very strong impact after natural catastrophes. In Haiti, there are studies after the hurricane in Haiti in 2016, how women suffer much more proportionally than men, because women tend to be in activities that makes them more exposed to these natural disasters. So gender and gender inequality plays a huge role to understand what is going to happen with climate change. Another one is gender roles. For example, in sub-Saharan Africa, it is the woman that walk long distances to fetch the water or to fetch the wood for burning. So what happens if the water now is farther, and what happens if there is less water, etc. So the gender roles is going to also play a very important determinant factor in terms of how the family is impacted. So the entire family is not impacted the same. Gender plays a very important role here. There is one study on impacts on families and adaptation potential. So here, what we look at is how can families then adapt to climate change, and what are the issues that we need to keep in mind. So there are 4 here that I'm going to mention. One is equity. I already mentioned equity within among countries. So rich countries are going to do better than poor countries, but also within societies. Rich people can spend more on air conditioning. People that don't have air conditioning obviously are going to suffer much more. And then equity within the family, the gender roles that I have mentioned earlier. The second issue is population growth. This is also one of the mega trends, but obviously the more people we have depending on less resources, the more they are going to be impacted. So if your population is already stable, you are more likely to be able to adapt. Countries that are going to have increases in population are going to have more people exposed to the impacts of climate and less ability to adapt because there are going to be less resources available. The third issue is migration. This has already been mentioned as a mega trend, but of course, more heat, less resources, less water, more migration. With more migration, you have more refugees. With more refugees, you have more suffering and more poverty. So it's a very clear and terrible vicious cycle. And then finally, aging and household composition. What is the impact of climate change, the various types of impacts on the elder, on children, and on others? So I will stop here. And as I said, there is not much research and knowledge precisely on these trends, on the impacts of climate change on families, but I think that those issues are those that are becoming quite clearly important to better understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gonzalo. It's very important information we heard from you today. And now we have an old friend of TIFI, Dr. Zita, Associate Professor in Demography, Health and Society, University of Pretoria, South Africa. I'd like to ask you, from your experience, in what ways are demographic trends affecting family dynamics? Zita?
Thank you very much. And like everyone is saying, thank you very much for the invitation to come and present on this. I'm interested very much on it because my background is also in demography, so it gets really interesting. And I'm at home talking about this, about demographic trends on families. So basically, I can say the previous speakers have really touched on what I want to say, but just for context, I'll say that demographic trends are shaped by 3 basic processes, which is fertility, the number of deaths, mortality, the number of deaths, and migration that we have been talking about. So over the years, out of those 3 processes, mortality has played a much lesser role than fertility and migration. So we are seeing fertility transition, a decrease in fertility throughout the world, even in some of the sub-Saharan African countries where fertility is still high. The take-home message that it is decreasing. It's not as high as it was in the 1960s and 1970s, even though it's still high. So across the world, we are seeing that. And this is largely due to improvements in just socioeconomic development, increasing education, particularly and labor force participation of women. And the other thing that we are seeing, migration, we are seeing regional, a number of, or high increase in migration, both international migration, but I'm talking from Africa, so I use most of my examples from Africa, and Africa is more regional migration, moving from within the region, let's say Southern Africa, moving to other Southern African countries or other African regions. But we are also seeing a trend in international migration, and I was seeing a comment in the box there that we can go through. So all these, another major trend that is really for related to fertility, in many countries, we are seeing marriage rates are declining. And the question here is, in what ways are demographic trends altering the threads of fertility of families? We are seeing that marriage rates are declining. The proportion of people who are getting married is going down in many countries across the world. And available estimates are that from Latin America, Africa, and Asia, the developing regions, that marriage decline is not only exclusive to developed countries. In Africa, for example, over the last 3 decades, we used to say that marriage is universal, but we are seeing a decline in that. And this decline in marriage has been accompanied by also the increase in the age at which people are getting married. So even those who get married tend to get married later, even though in some sub-Saharan African countries and some Asian countries, child marriage is still a problem, but we are seeing an increase in marriage. So how have these trends shaped migration, families? We are seeing other forms of unions taking place, especially in Africa. We are seeing an increase in cohabiting unions, and also in Latin America and slowly in other parts of Asia. But for a long time, it was more a developed country phenomena. I did my PhD 20 years ago, and it was on cohabitation, Botswana, and it was driven by that observation that cohabiting or consensual unions are increasing. And because now we're also seeing a de-link between fertility and marriage, there is a high number of childbearing outside wedlock. And I'm talking again from the African perspective. And this also leads to single parent families. We see a lot of single parents, particularly households that are headed by women, because in South Africa, for example, over 40, there's a statistic that goes around, just over 30% of children are living away from their fathers, what we call absent fathers. So they are living in families that are being headed by fathers. One of the reasons could be mortality, because the fathers have passed away, or because the fathers have migrated for work to go and live. But most of the time it's also because of non-marital wedlock. They have children and then the parents are not getting married. So because of the decrease in fertility as well, we are also seeing an aging population in many countries across the world. Aging is becoming an issue. And then with migration, smaller household sizes, because people are migrating and living, and then smaller family sizes because of lower fertility. So I want to get to the point of how these are altering trends. One of the major things that are coming up and have been mentioned is caregiving relationships. Because of low fertility, in the past, because people were having larger families, in old age, parents could depend on their children for old age care. But now the caregiving role for aging parents have been now reduced to smaller families. And that is also compounded by migration. And I'm a teacher, so I always like to give examples. I'm from Botswana. I live in South Africa. I left my old elder parents, and we were only 4 in the family. My other sister has migrated, so we're only 2. So you can see how that plays. So it was a smaller family, and 2 of them migrated, and the older family. So that caregiving relationship, especially practical care, you can migrate to anywhere and send remittances. But I think there's a point where an older parent needs someone to get them a glass of water water or to take them to the doctor, and the money can't do that. I talked about, and that's because of low fertility and also compounded by migration. I talked about the issue of absent fathers, where, especially in Southern Africa in particular, we see a number of families that fathers are not there, and then the children are raised by their mothers. And it can be because of migration, but most of the time because of out of wedlock. And then work-family conflict, because many families are migration, there is no, that traditional caregiving role is now, households are reduced in size. Many of the mothers don't have the father at home. Work-family conflict tend to be exaggerated because now you have to take care of this, and there is very little family care to help of this. And then intergenerational relationships, again, that have been talked about, and that we also link that a lot to migration, where people move, the children don't have that closer relationships with the older generation as before. So I also want to talk about the technological impact, and I would say, or some of the impact of this trend. We talked about technology, like Renata and the other speakers were saying that it was always there, but I think one of the things that one of the few positive things that we learned from COVID was how technology can try and facilitate some of these relationships. And we see that we are using it a lot. It has more, before COVID, I know we talked a lot about how you can be with a person but be aware. So just the negative impact of technology, especially on time spent with family and so on. But we have seen that because of that, families can keep in touch more often, intergenerational relationships can still be maintained across the world with all that migration and so on. So that's a positive side. So it is bridging the physical divide brought about by migration, and also facilitate work-family balance. That's also a two-pronged one. With an increase in work from home or more flexible work arrangements because of technology, so parents can stay at home. And this was one of the solutions we used to advocate for pre-COVID, to say, flexible working arrangements, and that has been facilitated. But like Renata has said, it also has some of its negative consequences there, because then you are working overtime and at home, but then you still have to be at work. So those are some of the things that have altered families. So I'm very interested, and I think we can talk when we have a discussion, because most of this have been talked about before, but the way forward, how we can support and protect families from this challenge, this mega trend. There's no way we are going to stop fertility. That around the world, especially in developed countries, there are initiatives to try and encourage fertility. It's a cultural transition, that's what we say in demography, and it's very difficult once the demographic transition has set in, to try and get people to have more children. So we might have to work around that. Migration, we can see how we can work around that. But I think one of the major ways we can support is just increasing coverage of social protection, especially in developing countries. And from my experience in Africa, aging care for older people, like we're saying that there is an increase in the number of older people, but the care facilities are not there. Old age pensions are very low. Very few people in Africa, for example, have pensions. Why? Because majority of them are in the informal sector. So it doesn't matter if we come up with the best parental leaves or social protection or social security measures that assume that people are in the formal sector. They're not going to benefit some of the people in the informal sector. As high as 80% of the population is working in the informal sector. So we have to look at social protection policies that I say are context specific and culturally sensitive. So things like childcare allowances to make sure that families can take care of that work-family balance. And maybe I know in Singapore and other countries, some of these are, in most developing countries, childcare allowances are some form of incentives for increasing fertility. So we could probably get that. And like I said, increase the coverage of social security. And this can all lead to the socioeconomic empowerment of parents and caregivers in the families. And I talked about that. And one thing that is very close to my heart that was also illuminated more by COVID was the care of family members with special needs. And that came, and I think this is going to be a very important, and special needs, we don't just mean physical disabilities. We know from OECD and all other countries how the level of anxiety and mental health issues really almost tripled across the world over the last 2 years, and then helping families to deal with that. So usually when we come up with policies and programs to help care support of children, there is an implicit assumption that we are thinking parents are caring for children who don't have special needs, who don't have mental health issues. And I think that's an issue that we should carry. It was always there, but I think with the increase since the pandemic, we really have to take that into consideration and pay more attention. So just to close and say the way forward, I would say 2 things if you asked me: increase social protection coverage, especially in developing countries, and also pay particular attention to assist caregivers or family members with special needs and mental health issues. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zita, and thank you for your example. It's really give us or allow us to understand the situation more and think about it differently. One of the mega trends we are discussing today is technology or technological changes and its impact on family relations. Our intellectual speaker, Dr. Susan Walker, Associate Professor in Family Social Science, University of Minnesota, will give a presentation on this regards. So the floor is yours, Susan.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be part of this esteemed group today. One of the great things about being part of conversations about the megatrends is listening to other experts, and as they do, finding such intersections. So I have a short PowerPoint, and if I have also shared a PDF of the slides. So in the sake of time, as I go through this relatively quickly, those slides can be accessed. Okay. So probably the simplest response to the question about how does technological change impact the family is to say how it doesn't. If we think about our own personal use of technology, how we're having this conversation today, we can certainly see the way that technology has impacted us in every single aspect of our lives, whether it's within our family homes or whether it's within our communities, our places of work, whether it is accessing information and the daily news or the weather, getting in our cars, moving transportation, flying long distances, technology has been a part of all of it. Especially in the last 30 years, if we think about and when I talk about technology, certainly, if we think in a very pure definition of technology, meaning innovation or design that has an impact on society, families have been impacted by technologies since the beginning of time. But specifically, our interest in technology is more what we would consider information and communications technology, our use of the internet, our use of mobile devices, our use of data transfer. So specifically, when we shorthand and refer to technology, what we're meaning is information and communications technology. And part of what makes this so fascinating is the rapid change in a relatively short period of time. For those of us who are old enough to remember before personal computers and before the internet, we especially can appreciate the rapid change. And I'll have to say that one of the challenges with researching in this area is that technology changes so rapidly that for those of us who are researchers and looking at impacts on a personal level, a process level for families, it's just as the data is understood, technology has changed once again. And something that we did one way has now become even more efficient, or it's become much more mobile. So when we talk about technological change, compared to, say, something like urbanization or climate change, certainly we're talking about a much shorter period of time, which again has an impact on our ability to do research. So at this point, we have a nearly ubiquitous internet access across the world. We also have our use of mobile devices has gone from clunky cell phones to smartphones, and we can only imagine how our communication will change in the coming years. There's been a radical change in data-driven operations and data transmissions. We've seen the move from the internet to a read-only 1.0 to interactive, and now through collaborative, creative, and social media. And while, as it's been stated, as technology has certainly made our lives much more efficient and has reduced time and space barriers. And again, the example of COVID is an excellent one, because as many of us were driven back to our homes to continue doing business, and through the luxury of technology that has now made doing work pretty much a 24/7 possibility. And it has also revolutionized the type of jobs that people have, where there are far more people who are digital nomads and who are really able to do their work anytime and any place. At the same time, it's also introduced certain threats. As we see within a family, the what's called technoference, or the attention to technology and the lack of attention to other relationships. But we've also seen the threats from this data-driven society to internet exposure, to security, to privacy violations, which has affected the family life. So one example, very briefly, on urbanization, as we've talked about, it's important with technology to keep in mind that there are a lot of ways that technology has affected us that we don't oftentimes think of at an individual level. So when we think, for instance, with urbanization, we now have smart cities, and smart cities have definitely improved the quality of life through our emergency services, our transportation that has become more efficient, through health services, environmental services, e-commerce, and on an individual level, it's also engaged more individuals in city planning, whereas before that planning was done by other individuals in maybe in a static location. Now, through the virtue of the internet, we can collect data. People can have a voice in how their cities are planned. And the exciting thing for me as a family scholar too is to see how this impacts youth. There is much more dominance of youth voices in the planning of our societies. So I use this ecological framework to talk about both impacts as well as solutions. So if we think about what's going on within the family, but then we also think about the use of technology as it influences the family at a more community level, when we think of schools, when we think of healthcare, when we think of the workplace, things like that, communities. And then at the very larger macro level, our policies that impact technological infrastructure, our governments, the technology companies themselves that create devices, create the programs that do make our lives more efficient, but at the same time, maybe collecting data that create a sense of concern at a family level. We also see that these context differences affect families differently. So we have differences that occur within families. So for instance, generationally, again, for those of us that are from an earlier generation, we see a difference in the comfort and access and use of technologies, and we'll see this within the family home. And so there's a very interesting power differential shift, whereas before the power hierarchy might have been with the elders, and now because youth are much more comfortable using technologies, that power differential is leveled off. We also see differences certainly across families, and what goes on in one family cannot be assumed to be the same for other families. And we see that not only in a micro level, but we also see it within communities, and we also see it globally. So a big feature, and this too speaks to a lot of the trends that we're seeing, is on access. And so internet access is certainly not the same, even though living in a more urbanized environment, we think, well, everybody has a phone. Everybody has access to the internet. The first thing that you do when you go into a building is to check for Wi-Fi access. But unfortunately, it's not the same worldwide. And in this graphic, you can see differences in sort of almost the northern hemispheric countries compared to those below the equator. And this is an impact on the infrastructure in countries that have also allowed more of the internet infrastructure to be developed. More individually, however, we can see differences within countries and differences within regions. This data, for instance, is specific to the Middle East, and we can see how there is within the Middle East, there is more of a saturation within the population compared to the rest of the world. So we see 80% by virtue of the population has access to the internet. However, on the right side, you can see that depending on the country within the Middle East, you also see differences in internet access from certainly a country like Qatar that has pretty much universal access to the internet, other countries such as Syria or Yemen that have a much lower percentage of the population. And I'll share these links if you'd be interested in sort of drilling down to specific countries. When we think about access on the family, there are a variety, and many of these have already been identified. Certainly social and familial impacts, where we've been able to be much more in touch with family members. It has enhanced our communications. At the same time, it's also had potentially a negative effect on our social communication. Again, depending on how technology is used, it's affected practical and daily life, from our smart homes, our use of smart devices, and just the efficiencies of being able to shop, the efficiencies with transportation and so forth. It certainly has impacted family life and employment. And for children, and this is where a lot of the focus with research has been, is on educational achievement, and to see the impact on children's ability to learn using various learning technologies, as well as access in the schools and through COVID. And when children needed to learn at home, that differential between the children who had access to devices in their homes, who had internet access at their homes, and also internet access and devices at the schools. And so that, again, that access differential is going to affect how well children are able to participate in school, their academic achievement, how well families are able to engage in employment, their practical daily lives, and also their connection to social services, their connection to each other, and that feeling of connectedness and cohesion that bring families together. The other level that it's very important that I think we address is not just at the family level, but at that community level, and all of those professionals who work with children and who work with families. In my own work, preparing professionals for many, many years, and the look at technology preparation by those professionals, that's a missing link. We're oftentimes focusing on internet access at a very wide level. We're looking at a micro level at the family and how families are using technology, but oftentimes those professionals who are working with families are ignored. We are leaving it up to an assumption, perhaps, that because certain people are comfortable with technology, they're using it in their practice, or that an employer is integrating technology. But what we see is a vast differential in terms of the access to devices, the access to training. And what that means then is that those professionals, those practitioners who are teaching children, who are working directly with families, those healthcare practitioners vary greatly in their comfort, their skill, and their access to devices, which then affect their ability to work effectively. We also see that there is a strong need for digital literacy, not just in having access to devices, but how you use them and how you use them safely and practically. And in terms of privacy and safety with data sharing through social media and software companies. We've also seen that the sort of behind the scenes or the use of what's happening with data that people are not aware of can also lead to challenges with human trafficking, with intimate partner violence. And so we sort of underground, and somebody mentioned about services for families with members with special needs. That is absolutely, we oftentimes are addressing more visible issues and less of the hidden issues. So my policy recommendations, very, very briefly, is one that anything that we're talking about related to the internet, talking about digital access, use within families, is also being addressed by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It's very heartening for me to see reports from UNICEF, from Doha International, from the any of the agencies that are addressing families, that they are also addressing the internet and technology access, and what I would say level access or equitable access, especially because we know that the impacts for families who do not have technology are especially affecting those who are most vulnerable and are experiencing economic and demographic challenges. Also, again, just a push that we also attend to the professionals at that professional level, the practitioner level, that we ensure that they not only have access to devices, they have access to the internet, but also that they have training in the comfort and deployment of those technologies. And then looking at regulation and policy related to data privacy, sharing, the potential for threats to safe use, and again, with particular attention to those who are most vulnerable. Thank you again very much. I will put into the chat box a couple of the links to UNICEF and to the internet statistics for anyone who is interested, and I have shared a PDF of the slides. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Susan, and thank you for the very productive and fruitful conversation and remarks. Now we open the floor for a question from the audience. I received the question. I think this is for Iman, which is related to migration, and it's from Salwa from Tunisia. We talk about migration as a family megatrend, but what about illegal migration that damage Arabic families in North Africa? We observe an increasing number of this type of migration. How we can from this harmful phenomenon? Iman.
Thank you, Dr. Sharifa. Actually, I was writing in the chat the answer, but also I will just say it to Ms. Salwa. First, the correct international definition is irregular migration, not illegal migration. IOM see migration as first and foremost about people, and as a phenomenon that needs to be managed, not a problem need to be solved. Also, we see migration as an opportunity to affect economics on a micro and macro level. We urge governments, and we work together with governments, to look at migration from this angle, and so we can all benefit from migration. And that's why we have the Global Compact for Migration, which was signed by majority of the states in the UN, which actually paved the way for the states to have a migration governance, because unfortunately, the fears from migrants, which is crossing the whole world, not only certain part of the world, it's increasing against migrants, and this, of course, caused lots of challenges for migrants and go in irregular pathways. So hopefully I could answer, or at least answer some of the inquiry Ms. Salwa was initiating. Thank you, Dr. Sharifa. Hello, is it only me freezing, or yeah? Okay, Dr. Sharifa.
Thank you, Iman. I think I have a problem with the net little bit. I will try to ask one question for each because of the time, but the question is for Renata. Why some important themes like poverty or employment have been neglected in the 4 mega trends, although it is highlighted in the SDGs. Renata?
Yes, sure. Okay, so actually in our work, we focused on poverty, we focused on employment, we focused on all the SDGs that relate mostly to family policies. So especially SDGs 1 to 5, and then SDG 11 as well. So there's a lot of work that has been done on these issues, on employment, importance of employment for family empowerment, and on poverty, definitely. So of course, we continue to look from the mega perspective on. So in the division for inclusive social development, these topics are being discussed, and also at the commission we'll have poverty again coming back to the session of the commission. So these issues are not neglected. When we talk about urbanization, we also talk about job creation for family members and how it impacts. So these are kind of sub issues that we try to address within mega trends. So just for the preparation for the 30th anniversary, the mega trends we thought were just really never discussed before. So we have to address them from this perspective. But the sub issues of poverty, employment still are covered and are focus of our attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Renata. The question for Gonzalo. As you know that we as a policy hub, we have now advocacy and we nudging for many policies. So how to, you think, to nudge for the integration of social aspect at large in the environment and sustainability research? Gonzalo.
Thank you, Dr. Sharifa. I think that especially when we look at climate change, it is impossible not to think about equity when we think about adaptation, because really the impact of climate change is going to be very different depending on where you live and who you are. So it is very unfortunate that the countries that have emitted the least amount of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere are those that are going to suffer the most. So any response to the climate crisis has to take into account socioeconomic considerations. And in fact, this is at the center of the current discussions, and this is going to be a very important topic at the upcoming COP27 in Egypt. So I think that it is impossible not to think about it in an integrated manner.
Thank you, Gonzalo. I have also a question here for Susan. How technology can be contributed as a facilitator for work-family balance in the post-pandemic? Susan, what do you think?
About how technology can facilitate work-family balance? Interestingly, well, again, looking within the family, One of the issues that families now are facing is boundaries. Whereas before our boundaries were imposed by work time and a workplace, now depending on the type of work, and this certainly is not universal, but for family members who can work from home, they've become so comfortable with facilitating many family roles 24/7, that for the individual, it's becoming very, very psychologically stressful and creating some effects, some mental health effects, depression, anxiety, that we haven't yet seen. We didn't see when our time was more bounded. So we've somewhat given up that a strain of commuting to places and working within bounded time and then having to pack in family duties outside of it, and the luxury of balancing everything at the same time. But what is happening is for a number of people that they're needing to be able to impose boundaries on themselves, to be able to impose space within the home, time within the home when they're doing one role, and trying not to do multiple roles at the same time. On the other hand, at a more macro level, we see equitable differences in terms of how technology is, so people who have access to technology enjoy those efficiencies. Those who don't have access, say, to mobile devices, or they don't have high-speed internet lines, are facing many more challenges to being able to facilitate work, to do a lot of the same employment efficiencies, to be able to attend to family matters, caregiving, education for their children, self-care, because again, they are facing much more of those bounded time and space constraints. So in large part, as with many things, it relatively depends. But we can't ignore this increasing trend of breaking down boundaries and what it might mean to individuals' mental health.
Thank you, Susan. We'll go to Zita. Africa has many different sub-regions with different economic and social settings. However, still fertility is not a concern in population policies, as there is no fertility decline. How do you see this?
Okay, I'm not sure if you said if there is no fertility decline. Is that what you said?
Yeah, it is. It's no focusing in fertility decline.
Yeah.
In the policies. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not sure if I got the question. I think maybe can I please ask you to repeat? There was
okay. Like we know that Africa has many different sub-regions with different economic and social settings. However, still fertility is not a concern in population policies, as there is no fertility decline. How do you see this?
Okay, I'll focus on fertility decline. Like I said in my short presentation, I said that there is fertility decline in Africa, especially in Southern Africa. We say that is leading the fertility transition. So that's what is happening. Even though especially in West Africa, fertility is still high, there is definitely a decline. So I'm not sure. So we do take that into consideration when we are.
I think there is a question for.
Okay, yeah. So there is fertility decline throughout Africa. It might be slower in.
Okay, you can.
It might be slower in other parts, but it is there. And I think the way to do it is recognize that in all the social policies and plan around that. When we are talking about cities, when I'm talking about social protection and everything that comes with it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry because I'm receiving the questions. So I'm trying to just ask it as I receive it. So just because of the audience, there is another Johara, and it's for Rata. What is the role of civil society in shaping and contributing to the UNDESA work? Just a minute. Again, another question. Yeah. What is the role of civil society in shaping and contributing to the UNDESA work on the 4 megatrends? Sorry, because I'm receiving question like I'm missing some of them. So do you want me to repeat, Renata, or it's okay?
No, that's fine. Yes, of course. So we really we appreciate the engagement of civil society in all our work. So it's really important to hear from civil society representatives. So I can hear Arabic translation. Can you, like, do you also hear it? I think someone has the mic on. Maybe Joyce, because yeah, I'm not sure. Okay, anyway, so this is also recognized by family resolutions, the General Assembly resolution, the role of civil society. So we definitely engage with civil society, and they offer us assistance in terms of their own research, their own advocacy efforts, and their own awareness raising events, activities in general. So definitely we were able to improve our outputs thanks to the civil society engagement. And in the family area, actually, there's a lot of civil society activities. So I'm very happy to cooperate with many civil society organizations. And for the 30th anniversary, just to give an example, there's the declaration, civil society declaration for the 30th anniversary, which many civil society organizations have joined. So that's a very good initiative for us to raise awareness about the anniversary itself and about the activities at all the levels, national, regional, and international levels that civil society can have. So I'm grateful for the cooperation, and it's really important to us to continue this engagement with civil society.
Thank you very much, Renata. And I think at the end we ran out of the time, and the discussion is very fruitful and hard to be stopped. So we thank you all for your contribution and the time. We will continue working with our partner in preparation for the International Year of Family, and look forward to seeing you all in 2024. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.